This conference will now be recorded.
So I started the recording, and yeah, so the floor or the microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you. Then I will share my screen real quick, and then let's start. Right, so let me just move this somewhere away. Please let me know if it's disturbing something. Okay, hello. So today's topic will be about QlikView to Qlik Sense migration, and my name is Ainars Augulis. I am data management team lead at Accenture. Have been working for Accenture for more than 9 years. My path in data analytics actually started off with the combination of Siebel CRM and Oracle Business Intelligence, or OBIE. There, of course, if some of you might know, then during the initial time there, Siebel CRM was a popular platform for customer relationship management systems, and together with OBI, you could do marketing campaign segmentation and other different kind of things with the data, and that's where I started off. And more than 2 years ago, I switched to Qlik as a technology, and from there on, for now, I have been already working more than 2 years with QlikView, Qlik Sense, and of course in printing. Of course, on this whole path, I have been working with Microsoft SQL, Oracle SQL, and other database management systems. Have worked in various industries with different clients in retail, media, and telecommunication companies, and also in the energy field. Of course, during this transition, I also did some certifications. So, of course, I have the QlikView Business Analyst and the QlikView Data Architect certifications as well, as this was one of the paths that I wanted to go. And for the education, I can share about myself that I have the master's degree in computer sciences in the University of Latvia. What I can tell about my current role is that I am leading a small team where we basically are responsible for platform maintenance, application development, and of course maintaining the server environments for the QlikView, Qlik Sense, and also in printing. Then moving on, for today's agenda, I have 3 main topics. So first of all, I want to discuss a little bit more about the future of QlikView and why Qlik Sense. Then we're gonna go into more deep dive about QlikView to Qlik Sense process itself. And as the last step, I can actually show step-by-step process example. So yeah, let's move on to the future of QlikView. As you maybe already have read and heard, then one of the most popular versions for QlikView, 11.20, it was already announced last year that it will be end of life date around March 2019, and after that Qlik will only be providing extended support for that version until this year, end of December. So When looking at this, there you can actually see two paths that you can actually go. It's either upgrading QlikView from version 11 to QlikView 12, or consider migration from QlikView to Qlik Sense. And I will talk shortly about both of these paths, what you can do and what you can expect. So first of all, the Qlik statement of direction is that for QlikView, they would have basically one big feature release per year if you go for the QlikView upgrade path. And as you can see from the picture itself, they mostly will include in this feature release like bug fixes, some improvements for the Qlik engine, but nothing more than that. Basically, new features are not really considered in that path. And on the other hand, for the Qlik Sense, there they are promising future releases every 10 weeks. And from my current experience, that is also what they keep on doing. They push new releases for the Qlik Sense. Then moving on, if we consider the QlikView upgrade path, of course, Qlik says that they will continue the support of moving further to the QlikView 12 version, but yet the future of QlikView remains a little bit uncertain. So that's at least what we currently see, that there is no clear indication of how long the QlikView will be prolonged. And regarding the transition from the QlikView 11 20 version to QlikView 12, the main feature change would be mainly related to the Qlik engine. And from my experience, what I can share, if you do this kind of transition, that is, then it's always useful to retest the previous reports, basically do the regression testing for it, because we have had some experience that after this move there might be some differences when the Qlik engine starts to process the old reports on the new engine. And then of course you might the new engine might affect also some performance, and that's why it's good to do some regression testing if such path has been chosen. Yeah, and compared to the Qlik Sense 10-week feature releases, as I already mentioned, there will be only one feature release per year, and mostly those will be bug fixes, security updates, and basically improvements for the Qlik engine itself. And the second thing is, of course, choosing the path from QlikView to Qlik Sense. And here are some overall gains that we see. First of all, Qlik Sense is more of a self-service tool. So that means end users can work more independently. As in QlikView, they would have to build decent reports, they would need to depend on developers. Then Qlik Sense is more moving towards the end user and tries to set up features which help the end users do the reporting themselves. Another thing to address here is, of course, security. Because in QlikView you basically would have the security based more on the application files itself, and of course some additional things can be done through the distribution service on the QlikView server itself. But when we are talking about Qlik Sense, actually the tool itself provides even more, so to say, security rules which you can apply to certain objects, to certain folders and libraries and so on. So that's another gain that you can see from choosing Qlik Sense. Then of course, what is the idea for the Qlik Sense is that you can use simpler visualizations and limit the customized visual experience for the users. And what it actually does, it helps the users to keep the focus on the key messages. They don't need to overdo it with some additional visualizations or some coloring that is actually not needed for the reporting itself. And when talking about the connections to the data sources, that's another thing that's one of the gains for Qlik Sense, that you can control more who sees what kind of connections. When in QlikView, maybe when you open some file, you can actually already access the connections and see what's going on there. But in Qlik Sense, because of these additional security rules, you can actually control and maintain the environment in a better way. And of course, it also helps from a security perspective, because if the users get to certain connections without proper security, then of course there can be many things that can go wrong. And yeah, one of the next points, of course, is that the Qlik Sense environment is easier scalable compared to QlikView. And on that regard, I would say that yeah, the Qlik Sense itself has been made such a tool that maybe it's a bit simpler, but on the other hand, you can have more control over it. And yeah, another thing to mention is that they have, of course, also responsive design. So if you know both tools, QlikView and Qlik Sense, then Qlik Sense provides also a dynamic resolution for different screens, regardless of the device that you are using. And then they also provide a new feature that is called a data manager. And the data manager is basically like a drag and drop view where end users can just select their data and really play around with it, and they don't need actual developers to help them work on their data. From an environment perspective, so Qlik Sense offers also two options. You can get Qlik Sense in the cloud, or you can, of course, choose Qlik Sense on premise. So those both options are available. And regarding the Qlik Sense cloud, there are certain maybe customers or clients that actually choose the cloud versions. So from that regard, I think Qlik Sense is doing the right things, and they have both options available. And last but not least, what are the gains right now? And this is actually a good option here. Qlik is also providing Qlik Analytics modernization program, and that basically offers a support program for migration from QlikView to Qlik Sense. And one of the main things that I want to mention regarding this is that they are providing their clientele the option to actually so to say reuse the licenses of QlikView in Qlik Sense so that they can be co-shared while you are doing your migration from QlikView to Qlik Sense. So in that case, you can like adapt to both environments while you are doing the migration, and it's what they are stating is the same cost for the same licenses. So you don't need to pay extra for during this kind of migration. And yeah, then let's move on to the next topic, which is the architectural comparison. And here I will just highlight some of the main things that are maybe interesting to know regarding the differences between QlikView and Qlik Sense. So first of all, when we talk about the concepts, as I also previously mentioned, QlikView is more of a guided analytics tool, and that means that end users cannot really build the reports themselves. They also need to know a little bit of the technical background there, and that's why it's maybe not the tool for the end users, while Qlik Sense is being pushed more towards the end user. So that's why it's more considered a self-service analytical tool. Then regarding the web interface for QlikView, if you know, then for different devices, for example, mobile devices, you also need to install some plugins. But for Qlik Sense, there is so to say zero footprint web interface, which means you can open your reports on any device, on any browser, and the layout is completely dynamic. And that is the main reason they are also pushing Qlik Sense so that it's more user friendly on the web interface regard. Then moving on about the report responsiveness, as you probably, if you have worked with both tools, then you know that QlikView has static report layout. So if you create it for one screen resolution, it's not gonna be dynamic. But on the other hand, Qlik Sense is going the path to have their reports really dynamic, so that the layouts are more adapted to different screens, browsers, and resolutions. Then moving on, also about a little bit about the multi-server architecture, and on that regard about speaking about the load balancing. For QlikView, you can of course do the load balancing, but it requires some manual configuration, while in Qlik Sense they have already thought about it more, and there is a proxy service which helps for a more automatic load balancing. So that definitely helps when you are using a multi-server environment. Then when talking about application security, as I also previously mentioned, QlikView is managing their permissions basically in the file, QlikView file itself, and you can do some additional stuff on the data distribution engine. But when talking about Qlik Sense, they have made one step further regarding security, and basically they introduced a feature called security rules, and the engine itself, it can determine which user has access to which stream. So stream in Qlik Sense is like a folder structure, and then you can also add additional security rules, which might also determine some further steps what kind of objects you can modify and so on. So from that regard, Qlik Sense has really thought about the next level of the security there, and it also helps to better control who and how accesses the connections. Then the next thing is the application deployment. So as you might know, then for QlikView, if you need to do deployments from environment to environment, then it's basically copying physical application files from one environment to another. But in Qlik Sense, they also have introduced a import functionality so that you can basically go into the Qlik management console and actually import the files, and it's not only importing but also exporting the files, so it makes things a bit easier here. Then also one interesting topic is of course is the licensing. And for licensing, for QlikView, you require the server license and then the user licenses. But for Qlik Sense, it is a bit easier. You only just need one basic license, which can be like a token, which you can assign either to a user or a session pool, and then that's it. You actually don't need separate license for the server anymore. Then regarding application development in QlikView, so if you want to do development, you definitely need QlikView desktop installed on your server environment. But for Qlik Sense, the same view that you use for looking at the reports, you can also use for development. So basically, you just need to grant different access to certain functionality, but it's the same window that developers can use and also the end users can use. Then regarding the repository database, there are also some slight changes. If for QlikView, the main repository types that are stated by Qlik are XML and Microsoft SQL Server, then for Qlik Sense, the architecture has shifted more towards XML and PostgreSQL databases. So that's one of the features, and of course, when we are talking about the PostgreSQL databases, then of course you can also do a multi-server environment setup for the repository database, and then you can specify one of the repository as the central node, and the rest of them are like child nodes to the central node, and that can come in handy when you need to maintain a bigger environment. Yeah, and another feature that is currently coming up with Qlik Sense is the big data support. So initially Qlik stated that they already have good big data support, and basically this 100% in memory approach or direct discovery can be used for big data loading. But actually for Qlik Sense, they also have introduced ODAC, which is basically on-demand application generation, which is like an API, and they are stating that this can be used for, let's say, connecting to big data sources like data lakes and so on, and you can do the reporting in a real time directly to the source system. So that's a new feature that they actually are presenting for some time now. but unfortunately I haven't had the opportunity to really test this. Then moving on about the data source governance. So as I also previously mentioned, basically everyone who can see the code can basically see the data sources. But in Qlik Sense, you govern more who can see what, and that's again based on the security rules feature that is available in Qlik Sense. The next thing is about the custom objects. The custom objects basically were a little bit hard to set up in QlikView. It was possible, of course, but they also had their limitations. Yet on the Qlik Sense, they already offer a developers hub where you can actually do the development for new custom objects. There are also so-called objects mashups and widget libraries, and all of those items you can customize yourself if you want to. Then regarding the REST connections, so in QlikView to have the REST connectors installed on the server environment, you needed to install them separately. On Qlik Sense, this comes as an out-of-the-box feature within the installation, so you actually don't need to do some additional installations there. And then regarding the alert notifications, in QlikView you could send out alert notifications as emails to an SMTP server, and then you can send them out to admins or business users. And what here has been the change for Qlik Sense, they actually have created alert notification option via the Qlik Sense mobile app, and that is actually an interesting topic, and we are also currently looking into the Qlik Sense mobile in one of our projects, and it's quite interesting feature. Of course, you need to think about security there, but this is definitely an interesting topic that we see that the end users are interested in. Yeah, so that's regarding the alert notifications. Then moving on about the artificial intelligence, it's of course also a hot topic to discuss. And for QlikView, there is not really an out-of-the-box solution that can cover that area. But for Qlik Sense, at least, they have made first steps towards AI, and they have introduced Insights Advisor and Smart Chart Suggestions. The Insight Advisor is actually a feature that tries to predict how you want to what kind of insights can you get from your data, and the chart suggestion is a feature which allows the end user to actually get some propositions what kind of chart to use in a certain situation with some certain data. So from that regard, it's also interesting what else they can provide moving on with the path of the Qlik Sense. And the last feature that is interesting also in Qlik Sense is the storytelling feature. It has been introduced for some while now, and what you can basically do, you can create your own presentation within the Qlik Sense application. You can record some certain steps that you did for your analysis, and of course, if needed, you can also get them out in a PowerPoint if needed. So it's an interesting feature which I think QlikView maybe was missing. So because for the end users, it's a real-time analysis that they can do and actually also create a presentation for it. Okay, maybe you guys have any questions so far, or then I will otherwise continue with the process overview, how this migration might happen.
If you have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask. Or also you can use chat box.
Yeah. Okay, if you for now don't have any questions, then just feel free to drop them also in the chat, and then I can come back to them later. So let's now look at the overall process and what we actually need to do and how does it look like. So when talking about the transition from QlikView to Qlik Sense, they have implemented already a feature within Qlik Sense so that you can make this process a bit easier for yourself. And this is called the QlikView Converter utility. Basically, when you use this utility, it is possible to like drag and drop the existing QlikView file onto the Qlik Sense converter utility, and then you can automatically migrate your application from QlikView to Qlik Sense. So what happens when you do this is that most of the parts of the QlikView still remain. Basically, you can reuse your data layer. The same Qlik engine technology is used, so you know that it's not gonna break in the middle of the process or something. You can use the same data, of course. You can convert the same expressions, and the only thing where I see a little bit of a struggle right now is maybe that you cannot convert all of the UI objects to Qlik Sense. And I will also discuss this a bit further. But yeah, basically, as you can probably expect, then some of the charts that maybe were available in QlikView, they are not really that often used, so they have been like decommissioned from Qlik Sense. But I will get back on that topic a bit later. So the overall process itself looks like this. So as you can see, most of the so to say backend features are actually easy to migrate, and the only change that I really see from moving from QlikView to Qlik Sense is actually the UI part, and maybe a little bit of the data connections towards the source systems. Because what happens during the migration is that the UI objects that were in QlikView, they are converted as master items and put in a library. So Qlik Sense is basically moving towards a structure where you have libraries where you keep your items or objects in them. And yeah, from the migration perspective, then part of the objects that can be migrated, they are put into libraries. For example, the UI objects all are that can be transformed can be put in as master items in the master item library, and then you can just reuse them when rebuilding your Qlik Sense application. And the other thing about the data layer, so basically you can still reuse the same old QED files and so on. There is no restrictions regarding that. Only thing, as I mentioned, is again you need to create like libraries. Those are like predefined paths to certain folder locations, but the change is real quick, and it doesn't take that much of an effort. And here is another picture of how it actually then looks like. So basically everything regarding the scripts and the data models can be converted to Qlik Sense, and the visual objects are put into libraries. And the expressions as well, they are put into the libraries, and you can later on find them and reuse them. And then the only thing left after the migration process itself, once the migration is done, you can redevelop your application in Qlik Sense. Basically, it's quite easy. If you get used to the new interface, then you can just drag and drop items to the new sheets, and you are basically ready to go. And that's where also it comes in handy that the end users, if needed, they can actually do this themselves by dragging and dropping items into the sheets and doing some small modifications if needed. Okay, and then regarding the process and what you need to consider before you migrate. First of all, it's advised by Qlik that if in some weird scenario something goes wrong, that first of all you still back up your files before you drop them into the converter utility. But I think from that regard, it's just like any other risk management. So I would say, of course, always you do backups before you actually do certain things like migration, because there is always a little percentage of a chance that something might go wrong. But overall, at least I haven't experienced that many issues with the converter utility. And also the second thing, before doing the migration, it is needed to remove the section access scripts if there are any within your old QlikView application. You can basically move them into the main code area, and once that is done, you can remove the or delete the hidden scripts from the hidden script section, and then you have to reload the QlikView application. It's just like a precaution that this hidden script doesn't interfere with the conversion of the file. Yeah, and then regarding the data layer, as I mentioned, all the load scripts from the data layer are moved to Qlik Sense. What maybe needs to be done after the migration is that you need to set up new libraries for the connections, but in my opinion, it's really fast. Once you set them up for the first time, there is no big issue to actually change this. And of course, you need to apply some changes to the paths as well. But yeah, I think it happens pretty fast from a time consumption perspective, so I don't see any issues there. Yeah, then of course, as I mentioned, you can also reuse the existing QED files. There is no issue with using them in Qlik Sense. And yeah, connections to commonly used data sources are still possible to be set up, and there is no issue regarding that topic during the migration. And then, yeah, once the data layer has been reloaded, and you don't see any issues after you have converted your application, then it's good to save a backup of this file before you re-enable section access. But for the section access, I think it's a general rule, and it was also usually mentioned when you work with QlikView, that if you change the section access and if something goes wrong, then better keep a copy of the file just in case there are some kind of issues during the reload of the script there. Yeah, and once you have backed up your application, you can try reloading the Qlik Sense application also with the section access code. Just to mention here, Qlik Sense does not use all of the section access fields that were used in QlikView. So keep that in mind if you used some interesting setup there. Yeah, and about the application layer, what I can share is that after the migration process, there are certain objects that are moved to the application layer of Qlik Sense. Those are, of course, the dimensions, the metrics. They both are placed into the master item library. Of course, also the expressions are migrated, and the variables are also stored in Qlik Sense. And another thing, not only does Qlik Sense store the variables from the application layer itself, but it also stores the ones that are loaded from the load script. Basically, it shows you all of the variables that are used within the application. Yeah, and what else I can mention, of course, here is that you cannot really expect that the application layer is going to have all of the objects like charts migrated fully. So that's, of course, a small drawback, but you can always adapt to the situation, and I will also explain what are the possibilities there if there are certain objects which you cannot really see anymore. Yeah, and this brings me to the next topic, which is actually the interesting one about the UI layer. So basically about the chart compatibility. What I have seen during the migration is that first of all, yeah, some of the UI objects might not be migrated, and it might be that certain objects don't look the same after the migration because Qlik Sense doesn't have that many possibilities to change the visuals as it was in QlikView. But there are certain things that you can really think about if you really need them, and then just adapt your layout to a new way how it looks. Yeah, what I also have seen from the migration is that sometimes the coloring of the charts is not kept. So depends on who was developing the application, of course, and then it might be that you need to apply the data types, like is it a date, is it a number, or some text that you need to reapply manually. But I think it really depends on who did set up the QlikView application. Maybe if that wasn't done in a good fashion, and that's why you need to do some additional steps there. Yeah, and of course, as I mentioned, there are some advanced visual styling that is just not possible in Qlik Sense. But from that regard, if we are talking that Qlik Sense is moving more towards a simple way of using the tool, then I think it's pretty acceptable that certain features are not gonna work anymore in Qlik Sense. Yeah, so from that point of view, I think you can still do quite a lot, and for the basic visualizations and reporting, it's quite enough to still keep the main idea alive, and you don't necessarily need crazy coloring and some complex visualizations to actually bring your point towards your end users. And here is like a chart of the basic compatibility and how it compares from QlikView to Qlik Sense. Yeah, and what you can see here is that all of these charts are the ones that you can usually use in QlikView, and from those, as you can see, the main ones like bar charts, line charts, combo charts, gauge charts, scatter charts, pie charts, pivot, and straight tables, they are migrated to Qlik Sense. But things like radar chart, Meko chart, grid chart, funnel chart, and block chart, they are not migrated. But most of them you can actually create manually if needed. That's still possible. But to be honest with you, I cannot explain why even though these charts are available in Qlik Sense, they are not automatically migrated. But this is the experience that I can share, that I have seen during the migration. So there are certain objects that you need to recreate. But from another point of view, there are of course also other sheet objects that were there in QlikView, and they are either not migrated to Qlik Sense, or it's not even possible to recreate them manually. But there is actually one thing that I want to highlight here. For example, when in QlikView we talked about list boxes and multi-boxes, basically for filtering and selections. Now it's like a combined object, which is basically a filter pane, and either you place there one of the dimensions in it, or you can use actually multiple fields for your filters, and then it's gonna become a multi-box. So from that perspective, there are also certain improvements there. And then, of course, as you can see, a lot of things like statistics boxes, current selection boxes, line, arrow objects, slider, calendar objects, bookmarks, bookmark objects itself, and search objects. You cannot place them anymore into Qlik Sense. Of course, there are still possibilities to create bookmarks and search, but you don't have the freedom to reorganize them within the sheet and just place an object wherever you want. It's like a fixed layout within Qlik Sense. And yeah, what I was actually most surprised this was about migrating buttons and text objects. Basically, the text object is used quite often in reporting for QlikView, and I was surprised that actually it's not migrated, so you actually need to recreate it manually. And the same goes for the buttons. Yeah, and of course there are not all things bad, and Qlik Sense has also offered new chart types which did not really exist in QlikView. And here you can see a big list of them, and from here I want to point out that actually the maps, if you know, then for QlikView you needed to install additionally the geoanalytics part, but in Qlik Sense actually the maps, they are already available, so that's a good feature that the end users really like to use. So as you can see, sometimes there are drawbacks, but sometimes there are wins. So from one perspective, I think that Qlik Sense is going the right way. They are trying to also help the end users in some interesting ways, how they can easier work on certain things themselves. Yeah, and moving on, there are other chart types, and here what I can actually mention why there are so many. Basically from last year, I don't remember which release it was, Qlik Sense is offering two dashboard bundles. Basically one is the Qlik visualization bundle and the second one is the Qlik dashboard bundle, and they can be installed if you want them to have. There is like two checkboxes that you need to check during the installation. Of course, you can just stick to the out-of-the-box solution if you really don't want to use them. But yeah, basically Qlik is also thinking of ways how to add new objects to their tool. So on that regard, these two bundles are available, and they try to implement things that kind of way. And here, of course, what I also want to mention is that, of course, there is another possibility, and that is to in Qlik Sense to use extensions. And extensions, basically, they can be set up by third-party providers. Some of them are free to use. Some of them you have to pay for, like for example Wizlib. But what I have seen, there are actually many possibilities to recreate the same functionality from QlikView within Qlik Sense. You just need to investigate more about the extensions there. Just what I have experienced regarding the extensions, if it's a third-party extension, then it might be once you upgrade Qlik Sense to a later version, newer version, then it's possible that the extension might not work in the new version, and then you have to wait a bit until the third party provides the new version of the extension. So that's one drawback of that. Yeah, and here actually I can show just an example of how it looks like when you migrate a QlikView application to a Qlik Sense application, and how does it look like. So as you can see there, even though it looks different, but there are certain things that you can still do even in Qlik Sense, and to keep the UI as close as it was in QlikView, it's actually quite possible. So yeah, it's probably depends on how much you want to keep the same structure, or maybe rebuild also your reports to structure more close to how Qlik Sense path is going. So that's always a decision that you need to make. Yeah, and then just shortly, so what I wanted to explain, I myself, I am from the Accenture BI data warehousing specialty track, and that one is it originated basically under the CRM department, where Anton Zgandziks was the lead, and there we also have Liga, who is the data visualization guild lead, and she basically is working towards all the tooling like QlikView and Qlik Sense. She's on top of things there. As you know, then the QlikView and Qlik Sense, they are good data visualization tools, and they both are our leads there. And yeah, if you feel like I have interested you with something, and you are maybe looking for some career opportunities, don't hesitate to contact us, and we will be glad to stay in touch with you. Yeah, and maybe you have some questions before I move on to the last section. I will just briefly then go through how this process looks in real details about the converter utility.
Seems no questions right now.
Okay, then I will move on with the last part, and yeah, just to have a quick look on how it looks. So as I explained previously, there is this developer hub. You basically can select it. The same goes basically for the, if you have Qlik Sense desktop or you are doing it on the server environment, you can, if you are the administrator, then you definitely will have access on the server as well. You open the developer hub, then there at the lower part of the left-hand menu, you have the QlikView converter utility. You can select that, and here then you can drop your QlikView file onto it, and then the converter utility will start the processing of the file. Yeah, and as I mentioned, what you need to do before you do this, you go into the QlikView application, you remove the hidden scripts and place them commented into the main section. Once that is done, you delete the hidden scripts, and then, yeah, this is an example of how you can also manually select the file if you don't want to drag and drop it. You can select the file, and once you have done the conversion of the application, you can review the objects. As you can see on the left-hand side menu, again, the application shows up. Then you can select it, and yeah, then you can review objects that you want to be migrated. And there you can also it basically displays like 4 sections. There are visualizations, dimensions, measures, and variables. And there it's there you have like a list of items, and you can check which ones you want to remain. It also sometimes displays which items you cannot convert. It will show it up in a list that these items need to be recreated manually. And yeah, other thing that you can do there is before doing the actual conversion, you can change the object names, because it depends on who was setting up the objects themselves. Maybe they didn't have a name, so it just shows you the expression name, or it has just question mark or one displayed as a name. So you can modify things like that before doing the actual conversion. Yeah, and in the unconverted objects section, you then can see objects that will not be converted. But yeah, from my experience, what I can tell is that from the unconverted objects section, the text box didn't even show up. Not sure why this object is an exception there, but okay, I just saw that these kind of items are not migrated, and I had to recreate them myself. Yeah, and these are just some examples. So the naming that you can do, as you can see, there is a name. You can always do something about it if needed, and also it shows the unconverted objects list. Yeah, and another thing, once you are done with all your steps, you can press create app, and then for the first time it's gonna create your Qlik Sense application file. If there are errors, then it's gonna show you during this process. For example, once I forgot to remove the section access, and then the converter utility was just throwing errors that it cannot access the file and migrate it. So I think from that perspective, it's quite okay to use this converter utility. It's not like it's gonna break down or something. So and it's really easy to use, in my opinion. Yeah, and once the application has been generated, you can open the Qlik Sense hub, and there you can basically see your recently created application. Yeah, and another thing, and that's what I experienced. If you converted the application, you started building something on the new application already, like creating new sheets, adding some objects, then you should keep in mind, if you go back to the developer hub, to the converter, and here you change something like the names of objects and so on, and you press update app, then it can update your recent changes within the hub that you did. So my suggestion here is that first of all, you do all the changes here within the converter utility, so that you don't have to later on update the app. So otherwise, if you're gonna press the update app button, it's gonna wipe your changes that you did, and it's gonna place the changes from the converter utility back on the file. So that's my my experience with this. But of course, during a normal migration, I would say that it's completely normal to first do all the things here and only later do the updates then. Yeah, and regarding the data layer transitions, so first of all, you again go to the data load editor, then you can re-enable first of all, you can of course create the new connections. As I said, so this is basically the library approach. You create a connection, let's say, to a certain path. If they are physical files, you name it, and later on you basically need to replace the path with only the library and the library name, and that kind of makes it kind of easy to adapt paths. And if you are using also variables where you specify certain paths, then it's quite easy later on to migrate from environment to environment. Yeah, and once you have reloaded successfully your application, you can do the backup of the Qlik Sense application, and then you can try to re-enable the section access, as I already explained. Yeah, and once that is done, you can move on to the app overview, and then you can start building your application. Here I want to mention that also sheets are not migrated from QlikView to Qlik Sense, so the sheets you need to recreate manually. But again, it's quite easy if you get used to the interface. It's no big issue. Yeah, and then in the application layer, all the items that have been migrated, like fields and master items, which contain the dimensions, measures, and visuals, all of them you can reuse. Of course, you can also create new charts if possible, and yeah, you can also use some custom objects like extensions if needed, and so on. So from that perspective, there are some possibilities there. Really depends on the requirements that what you need to achieve within Qlik Sense. Yeah, and I can also show a little bit about the layout if you haven't seen it. So within the asset menu, basically you have all your migrated objects like dimensions, measures, visualizations. As you can see, those are in the master items library. Then of course you have a variable editor. Then there is like sheet layout editing area, and yeah, then on the right hand side you have the properties window for certain objects, or you can also set the properties there for the sheets. Depends on what kind of object you currently selected. Yeah, and this is just an example of how the whole report was migrated, and these are a couple of screenshots. So basically the report had 6 sheets, and I could actually replicate most of them in a similar fashion in Qlik Sense. So as you can see, this is the first overview sheet. Then we have some trends. Yeah, as you can see, also the coloring in some ways is achievable. So yeah, it really depends on how far you want to go with the visualizations here. And of course, there are some additional things that you can show, like charts there and so on. So it differs a little bit, but I think it's quite acceptable from an analysis point of view. You still can see your data. You can still use most of the charts. Maybe the visuals are more limited, but yeah, as you can see, it still looks quite nice, and if you want to reuse it on different devices, then it's also okay to do so. Yeah, and yeah, that is basically it from my side. Any questions?
So, any questions? If not, I think from on behalf of Riga Qlik Meetup, I'd like to thank you, Ainars, for a great presentation and story. I think it was very insightful and sharing your experience.
Yep, thank you. Glad I could share my experience with you guys.
Yeah, and also, if any of today's participants are willing to share any story, not necessarily have to be 2 hours long. It could be also shorter one. Please contact me, and we will arrange another meetup. If you think you have something that others could enjoy and learn about Qlik, so we will be gladly creating another meetup for that. And with that, I thanks Ainars for the presentation. Thanks.
Sorry, there's a question from Gatis coming in.
Perfect. Yeah, let's see.
Okay, he is asking about the end printing and how do you switch from Qlik Sense to use Qlik Sense instead of QlikView. Actually, with the end printing, it's not that difficult. At least for the latest versions that we also use in the current project, you basically need to provide the correct connection parameters to the Qlik Sense file. It doesn't matter basically if it's QlikView or Qlik Sense. You just need to establish the connection to the file itself, and then you can also add end printing objects there. And basically you can also like fetch the data out of the Qlik Sense. Only thing that my experience was that certain objects from Qlik Sense are not working in end printing. And especially if you will use, for example, some custom extensions or something like that, then it might be that end printing will not be able to render these objects or extract the data from them. But yeah, the switch for end printing it's pretty straightforward, I would say. We only had a little bit of struggle with if the Qlik Sense is running behind the proxy server, then there is additional setup that needs to be done. But other than that, it's not that complicated regarding that. I hope I answered your question there.
Okay, it seems answer was question was fully answered. So if no more questions, I think then we can end today's session. Everyone, wish you a lovely evening, and Einar, once more, thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, you're welcome. Have a great evening, everyone.
And I will also share the recorded session afterwards in the Qlik Meetup. So thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye.